Okay, I should start this story by giving a bit of background so that you understand the situation a bit better. I, a 4'9", 16-year-old female at the time, had two dogs who were brothers from the same litter. Now, being boxers, they were relatively big and quite protective when need be. Vince was longer, much taller than his brother, and is usually the kind to sleep through a hurricane if we had one. His brother Mari was shorter but more muscled, stronger. Usually, these two were with me 24/7, as my mother used to work a lot, and I was alone most of the day, sometimes even until after dark. This never really bothered me. I'd been left alone at home since I was like 11. It never struck me that I had a reason to be worried. One day that my mom was working later, I was doing some household chores, feeding the dogs, doing dishes, stuff like that. I continued doing what I always had, a routine of tidying the house I had done every day for years. As I went to take the trash out of the bin, I started walking towards the door when Mari stepped in front of me. I tried moving around him, telling him to get out of the way, but he just refused to budge. This was certainly odd, and looking back on it now a few years later, I realized he was probably trying to stop me from walking outside. We continued like this for a few moments, me trying to get past him, and him, of course, never moving from his spot. He was quite heavy as a big dog, and it was difficult to lift him, and even harder to get him away from something. Now, in the time we had been going back and forth with this interaction, Vince stayed happily asleep on his dog bed. I should note that from my kitchen, you can see the living room and bathroom. Usually we use the side door from the kitchen to enter and exit the house, since it was attached to the carport. After a couple more minutes, I heard something that I hadn't expected when I made one last desperate attempt to move Mari from his spot. He growled, which wasn't unusual as he had growled plenty of times in his life. What was unusual was that he was growling at me. He had never done that before, not once. But for some reason, and that reason alone, I decided not to take the trash out that night. I simply tossed it in another room and left it be. A short time passed, maybe half an hour or so. I had gotten settled into my chair to watch a movie while I waited for my mom to come home. While I was watching the movie, I suddenly heard a quiet knock at the side door. As I mentioned earlier, you can clearly see the living room from the kitchen, so I heard the knock pretty well. It was already after dark, so I figured it was just my mother and she had somehow forgotten her keys. I got up, went into the kitchen, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw the hook near the door. The keys weren't there. To some people, that's not a big deal, but to me, it meant that the person knocking on my door was in fact not my mother. My mother is a bit of a routine-obsessed person, so if she actually had forgotten her keys, they would always be on the hook. I took a breath, preparing myself to just not answer the door, or if they didn't leave, to just tell them I wasn't interested in whatever was happening and that they should leave. Thinking about it now, I really wish I hadn't even looked out the window on the door. I wish I had just sat back down, called my mom, and stayed out of sight. But of course, I walked in front of the door and immediately came face to face with a figure on the other side of the window. Now it was really dark, with just my neighbor's light shining from his porch, so I could only make out a couple of things on this guy. He was tall, me having to peer up at him through the window to look at his face. He had long hair that looked like a shadow over his shoulders in the dim light, but the only facial feature I could really see were his eyes. God, I wish I hadn't seen them. I could see the spark of interest flare in them as he perked up when he saw me. They were wide and staring down at me. He took a step towards my door, stepping up on the first two steps. I heard him say something along the lines of, "My car broke down nearby. Could I come in and use your phone?" Immediately, I thought of every bad thing that I had ever heard happening to a teenager home alone, and I tried to compose my nerves. I'm not sure what it was, but something told me not to trust this man standing on the other side of my door. I shouted back a quick no and an apology, hoping he was telling the truth and would just go to the next house over. But he didn't. Instead, he simply said it again, quite a bit louder. I thought for a quick moment he hadn't heard me, but then again, I know now that he most likely had. So I instead became a bit more confident. "I'm sorry, I can't help you. Go to the next house," I shouted louder. For a moment he paused, as if contemplating what to do. Then he knocked again, louder than the first time I'd heard it. My heart rate increased as I stared at him. When I didn't react, he started to loudly bang against the door. I took a step back, praying to whatever god that he would either leave or my mom would come home early. I was usually a quiet girl, but my mom was a badass redneck with a raptor knife. She could definitely take him. He started to bang on the glass after a moment. My mind was racing 1,000 miles an hour. Should I hide? Run? My phone was in the other room, and I was scared to take my eyes off this guy. I was sure he would break through the glass. The banging was vibrating my eardrums, and apparently it was vibrating Mari's too. I saw him creeping up past the doorway, bending his head, teeth bared. He started to bark loudly. The guy stopped a moment, trying to see into the window at the floor where Mari stood. When he stopped barking, the guy mistakenly tried to jiggle the door handle. Now that's when Vince woke up. I swear to God, for a dog that was dead asleep 5 seconds prior, I'd never seen him move so fast, ever. In only 2 seconds, Vince had his paws up on the door, growling like a hellhound at the devil's side at this man outside my home. The guy jumped, fell back, and bolted it. I heard him say something as he started to run, and saw another shadow. My mom came home shortly after I sprinted across my carport to my neighbor's. We called the police after I explained what had happened, and my neighbor had dragged his shotgun out before they even got there. He had insisted on looking for the guy. The police had said someone had tried to pick the lock on my front door, but there was a lot of stuff in front of it. It was really old, so it didn't open anymore. I went to bed that night uneasy, and so very thankful I had 2 dogs who were not only strong and big, but one that was vigilant, and one that could practically kill if you let him. A few weeks went by, and we hadn't heard anything from the cops, so eventually I stopped trying to think about it. Another month went by, and although I was a bit scared of being home alone, nothing else seemed to happen. Then we got another visit from the cops. What they told me made my heart sink in my chest and still gives me chills to this day. They had caught the guys and realized they were stalking me. Yes, guys, plural. There were 2 guys that had apparently been stalking me without my knowledge for months. They had several photos of me, words they had written all over them, awful words. The police were fairly adamant about changing the locks, since they caught 2 guys and there was evidence of a third. We moved shortly after that. I still pass by that house sometimes when I go to visit friends or do stuff around the area. A chill runs down my spine every time I do. To think that they never caught one of the guys was scary enough. The fact that they tried to break into my house was worse, not to mention that I hadn't even known they were watching me. I still think about it even now a few years later. I dread what would have happened if my dogs weren't there, and I dread even worse about what they had planned to do if I opened the door, or if they had successfully broken in. I suppose they weren't expecting my dogs since our backyard is fenced, and they mostly stayed indoors since it was hot where I lived. I thank the universe every day that I had them, especially now. My mom never worked until after dark again after that, which in all honesty was fine with me. I'm a mother of 2 daughters and live out in the country. My husband is a welder and is a really outgoing and charismatic guy, which means he has tons of friends that will periodically stop by to hang out with him. In fact, there are some friends he trusts enough to use the tools in his garage and stay at his house when he isn't home. Well, one late afternoon he was gone when I heard someone pull into the driveway. We have 2 dogs who were going absolutely nuts with barking at the picture window in our living room. I looked out and saw a familiar-looking blue blazer, and assumed my husband's friend, Bob, was over to use something from the garage or wait for my husband to get home. He hadn't knocked on the door, so I figured that they had already talked to each other about it. No big deal. But the dogs would not stop barking and growling, which just didn't seem right because they knew Bob. So I looked more closely out the window and realized there was a man lingering near the garage. But he was not Bob. In fact, I'd never seen him before. I decided to take my dogs and go outside to see who he was and what he wanted. He told me he lived down the street and knew my husband. He was very friendly, and began telling me all about how he had to move out of his house because he and his wife were divorcing. He seemed quite familiar with my husband, and even about our dog Pepper, who had passed away a few months prior. Pepper was a very smart and protective dog, and could be scary if he thought harm would come to me or my family. He didn't realize that Pepper had died, and really seemed genuinely apologetic about it. Meanwhile, I noticed that my dog, Shadow, still hadn't settled down around this guy. He wouldn't let him pet him, and the hair on his back was sticking straight up. He would intermittently growl during our conversation, too. This was really odd for him, and I was pretty confused because the guy seemed really nice. After chatting for a while, he asked for my husband's number so he could call him. And that was a red flag for me, because if my husband wanted someone to have his number, he'd give it to them. So I told the man I'd give him a call right then. I called my husband in front of the man, who suddenly looked a little nervous. I explained to my husband that Jim from down the street was at the house to visit him. Immediately, my husband told me to tell Jim to get off our property and to never return. This scared the crap out of me, because like I said, my husband is really friendly and hospitable usually. He told me to make the man leave, and that he was on his way home. I ended up making some excuse to Jim. For some reason, I just couldn't say something so mean to him after he had just been so friendly and polite to me. And he backed up right away, suddenly quick to leave. My husband arrived home a short time later and explained that Jim was a severe crack addict who had been stealing from all his neighbors' garages. His wife threw him out because of this, and he's been desperate for cash to support his habit. He was probably scoping out what he could steal from my husband's garage and seeing what obstacles, my dogs, would be in his way. To think he could have harmed me or my kids makes me furious. He seemed so nice, and I felt like an idiot for not realizing the truth. I've learned my lesson now, though. If somebody comes over that I don't know while my husband's out, I call him right away. Update. My husband told me tonight that Jim was arrested and was currently in jail. He apparently was caught robbing my neighbor's garage. Good riddance. I'll never forget this. My then boyfriend and I had started helping out in an animal rescue association back in our country. We would mostly keep dogs for a few weeks until we found a family for them. One of them, though, we ended up falling in love for them. He was a mix with German Shepherd. He was very big, but very thin. He was also very scared when going out, though, and would walk almost between our legs and never two in front. One night I was walking him alone, and there was a major storm. He still needed his walkies, though, so I just thought of walking around the little plaza that was between the buildings where we lived. He's smelling and keeping close to my legs as usual. There's way too much wind, so I'm holding onto my jacket and keeping it closed, and I can't see very well around me. Out of nowhere, he gives me a huge pull and yelps and he lunges forward, dragging me with him. I was shocked and I thought, did I step on his paw? Not 3 seconds later, I hear a loud bang and something crashing a meter right behind me, right where I was standing. A giant metal plate fell from the top of one of the buildings. It would have crushed me. I would not be here today if he had not pulled me. I have no idea if he heard or sensed it coming down, but I could barely see, so I wouldn't have avoided it for sure. When I was a toddler, my grandmother's dog saved my life. It was the late 80s. My grandmother had these huge 200-plus gallon fish tanks throughout her house. The fish tanks had glass tops that you would slide open to care for the fish. One night I had climbed out of bed after everyone else was asleep in the house, and I guess one of the adults had left a dining room chair right next to one of the fish tanks. I, being young and curious, climbed up the chair and up on top of the tank to get a better look at all the cool fish. Well, the glass top broke somehow, and I was under the water. Definitely got a better view of the fish now. During this time, my grandmother's dog, a Rottweiler female named Odyssey, who was only a pup still herself at 8 months old, started to bark. My grandmother, who awoke when she heard the dog barking, was still very sleepy and out of it when she went to open the back door to the yard thinking Odyssey needed to go potty. Well, Odyssey started to whine and tug on my grandmother's nightgown, and my grandmother got more awake, realizing that the dog didn't have to go potty. Odyssey pulled her into the room with the fish tank by her nightgown and ran up to the tank barking and whining. She kept looking back to my grandmother and back to me, who was turning blue in the water. Long story short, my grandmother got me out of the tank and did CPR with Odyssey whining at her side. They gave the hero dog a steak as a reward the following day. I'd most likely be dead if Odyssey didn't alert my grandmother. She was a great dog who treated me and my older brother like we were her pups. A great, loving, and protective companion. I miss her so much.